I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for being here. The panelists we have today are David Wynn, Austin Parker, Vijay Samuel, Iris Dyrmishi, and Nočnica Mellifera. I'm hoping I got all those correct. And we'll do a quick round of introductions. This discussion is hosted by the OpenTelemetry End User Working Group, which I am part of, as is Adriana. I see her there. And yeah, today we're gonna just have a casual conversation. Feel free to get as opinionated as possible about basically the evolution of observability practices. And actually, David, since you're the one that inspired this, I would love for you to do a quick introduction, and after that, we'll just kind of go through the rest of the panelists. But yeah, let's hear a little bit more from David, whose brainchild this was.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Wynn. I am principal people machine something at Edge Delta, which is in the observability pipeline space. The thing about being a startup is you just sort of do whatever needs to be doing. So I flex the title appropriately as such. But yes, Reese and I were chatting about different ideas that might be fun to discuss. And one of them that seemed very apropos to the group would be sort of the evolution of observability and where things are going, how people are tackling the challenge of shifting to OTel, and what are some of the interesting lessons learned along the way, not only from the 10,000-foot view of like we see where the mountains will go, but also at the 10-foot view of, boy, this grass is tall sometimes, and trying to get a little bit of a feedback on all different directions of it. Yeah, so to continue with introductions, I'll go ahead and do it popcorn style. Iris, why don't you introduce yourself next?
Hello, everyone. My name is Iris, depending on the country where I am. Currently, I'm based in Portugal. I'm a platform engineer / observability engineer at Farfetch. So my day-to-day life is building an observability platform, maintaining it, modernizing it, and offering this kind of service to the engineers in my company. I don't know. That's all about it.
Go ahead and call someone else out.
Vijay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vijay Samuel. I work at eBay. My day job predominantly revolves around doing architecture for our observability platform internally. So everything, logs, metrics, events, tracing, helping all our developers do alerting, visualization, anomaly detection, the whole shebang with regards to observability. That's pretty much what I do. Austin?
Hi, everybody. So I'm Austin Parker, community maintainer for OpenTelemetry, formerly at Lightstep, a part of ServiceNow, and currently it's a surprise, and you'll find out very soon what I'm currently doing. So yeah, I've been a part of OpenTelemetry since it was created. I was a open tracing maintainer. I've been working in observability for over 5 years now, and got a lot of thoughts from seeing it kind of grow and evolve from what it was to what it is. And am I the last person?
Nočnica.
Or did Nika? Nočnica.
No, I didn't go. Hi, everybody. I'm Nočnica. I'm at the open source startup Signaz, and have been working with observability stuff from back when we called it Rails performance management. Mainly now working with OpenTelemetry and Kubernetes stuff.
Excellent. Thank you all so much again. And yeah, we have a list of questions that are kind of like intended to help guide the conversation, but once everyone gets going, I expect it to become a lot more dynamic. So, I think we're all totally happy to see where this takes us. So I guess to get us going, we want to know about the state of the world before you all undertook your OpenTelemetry journey. What was working pretty well, what did not work, or slash what sucked, and kind of what was the moment that prompted you to change. And feel free to raise your hand. I think, yeah, all the panelists at least are on camera, so if you need visual cues as to when you can step in, hopefully that helps. But feel free to raise your hand too, and then we'll do that way.
As long as Austin doesn't thumbs up, we'll be good.
I turned off the reaction thing. I'll actually start because I think I have what is probably not a very, maybe not a very unique story, but an interesting one. So before I got into observability as a field, I started on software doing QA. I was a SDET, software developer and test, and this was 2013, 2014, I guess, is when I started really getting into technology as a career, or software as a career, I should say. And the cloud was, a thing, but cloud native wasn't quite a word yet, right? Like we didn't have this concept of like, oh, we're building all these things with all these cool APIs and this idea of like infrastructure on demand or whatever. And so I saw, the company I was at go through these various transformations. And one of them, and one I helped kind of lead there, was a DevOps transformation where we went from, okay, when you build your code and you deploy your code, you pull a ticket, you write some code, works on your machine, great, you push it, and then that night someone else gets to deploy it and see if it actually worked. And one of the things we wanted to do was really tighten up the feedback loop here, right? We wanted to get it from 24, 48 hours before changes got into test to minutes or, hours and minutes. And a big part of that was getting on-demand infrastructure rather than sort of static infrastructure. So we're going through this and we're building all this out and we're getting stuff into the cloud and it's great. And what we started to see, though, was it wasn't actually fixing a lot of the problems we had. Like there was kind of this, ground truth that everyone had agreed on beforehand. It's like, well, the problem is that we have, the infrastructure is bad, right? Like these servers are not properly cared for. We're wiping stuff and recreating it rather than, actually getting fresh in images every time. So it must be some just config thing. It's probably not the code. And then, something would go into production, it'd make it into a patch. And then the customer would come back and say like, hey, this is actually broken. And we missed it because we thought this is because of the, our testing infrastructure. So when we start going into the cloud, have fresh images, we have all this stuff, and we're finding all these problems that we really didn't even know about before. And the question came back, it's like, well, what, how do we know what's going on? How do we know what's breaking? Our product was a platform as a service, right? So we had, hundreds and hundreds of nodes, various logs in all sorts of different places. It was Windows servers, it was Linux servers, we had all these different databases, and it was a very difficult, it was kind of big. It was hard to keep your head around. And one of the engineers actually came back and said, okay, I made a topology, a service topology. And it looked like, if you've seen one of those like nail art things where someone will make a picture by putting a bunch of nails and a piece of wood and then tying string together. It was like that, right? Where you have just like lines everywhere and things connecting each other. Nobody could keep this in their head. Nobody could understand how services actually talk to one another. You could look at like a very small section and you could say like, okay, I get this, but looking at it holistically was impossible. And I brought in, at the time, we tried New Relic, we tried Datadog, we tried a couple things. And what I found was, ironically enough, that it didn't matter what tools I brought in. The developers weren't interested in using them just because it wasn't data, it wasn't information that was kind of like at their level, right? Like they didn't understand, how do these things correlate? How do these, what does it mean when SQL Server spikes and memory usage increases, but there's no way to really tell like what was happening. And that's got me into observability, right? Is trying to answer that fundamental question. Someone was piggybacking.
Yeah, so right off of that, I remember working at New Relic towards the end of my time there, and there was this really fundamental thing of like, oh, this shows like how this request hit all these spots, and it shows it as like a trace, right, with a bunch of time spans, including like individual function calls on all these different services. Pretty cool. But we would get these questions back that were like, well, just show me where the request went. Show me what services were hit, and also like in an interpretable version. And it was an example where there's a lot of focus on getting a certain piece of information back, right? But the developers wanted information that was at a different level. Was exactly it. It's like, hey, I just want to know where the request is going, what services are involved, and how the failure on the SQL server might come back up and affect the front end in these ways. And that was very, very hard to tease out, whatever this was, 7 years ago.
But it's a similar theme, right? It's really about making sense of a pile of stuff. Again, trying to zero in on that moment. Before we get into these things, there's the point where you have everything, and then you realize that you thought that having everything was the problem, and then it's not. And then you're like, no, now I have everything and I still don't understand everything. Well, maybe I need to actually draw a map. And then you draw a map and you're like, wow, this computer doesn't know how to draw maps. And somehow this just looks like a bowl of spaghetti. And then you're like, cool, how do I zone this back down again, in and out and in and out? So it seems like sense making is at least one of the unifying concepts we see there. Vijay, Iris, whoever wants to take it, is that a similar feeling that you guys got when you were hitting this inflection point?
For us, the problem space was a little bit different in the sense that pre-OpenTelemetry, we have a pre-cloud native era and during cloud native as well. So if you take the pre-cloud native, like we have had something called the centralized application logging platform inside of eBay for more than 20 years. And it had the concept of transactional logging, where you have a root transaction, nested transaction, events, very similar to what we have in the tracing world today. But the problem with the pre-cloud native era is always that developers come into eBay, they have to learn proprietary clients. We had clients only for a few languages. So if they are not using that or writing their own code, you cannot observe things inside the company, or you're on your own to figure out, spin up your own elk stack or anything that you can do to monitor the system. And when cloud native hit, and we had large-scale Kubernetes adoption, we had the Prometheus endpoints scraping from log files, a little more flexible, but you did not have standardized SDKs across the board. Even for metrics, it used to be that a few people used to use the official Prometheus client, some used Micrometer, and for Node.js, you didn't even have an official community-supported SDK. So I think that's where, when OpenTelemetry came in with the promise of standardization, it was like, okay, now we can just offer all our developers one standard, and it's community managed. They can hop from any company into eBay, and they should be able to use the observability platform as long as we are OpenTelemetry compliant. So I think our story is a lot more developer productivity focused, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, I would say that my viewpoint, my story is kind of a bit like Vijay. My observability experience first started with some companies that had zero observability in place, and that's how I got to know it. I was like, okay, what is happening? So that was my job. And then where I'm currently working, I jumped on a completely different world that had a very nice observability platform, very nice observability culture, which was a big shock. And our job was actually not to come up with ways to monitor, but to just keep improving. And of course, we came to that bottleneck that we were using a lot of open source. We were using APM vendors. And to get the information, you have to go in 10 different places, which is not great. And I would say that it is in developer productivity viewpoint as well. Why we went the OpenTelemetry route, because everything is centralized and we can move from vendor to vendor if we need. We are collecting everything, standardizing everything. So I would say we have kind of the same case here.
I think to both of your points, like that to me is what is really transformative about OpenTelemetry, is that it offers a, for the first time, I think, this truly universal idea of like, how should I, as a developer, emit this telemetry information, right? Like, I think, Vijay, your story, eBay is not unique. Like most, especially large distributed, um, most companies that have like large distributed systems have had some sort of transactional tracing, some sort of structured logs with transaction IDs that they can, look at for a decade or more. Like, when we think about an open telemetry trace, you know, the actual data model is very similar to what Google produced in Dapper, almost 25 years ago now. Like there's nothing new under the sun. What's been missing is the idea that this is actually like a core part of being a developer, like a core tool in the toolbox, a core part of your trade is learning how to emit good telemetry about what your system is doing. And OpenTelemetry provides a standards-based way to do this that also can be natively integrated and available through your microservice framework or your RPC library or whatever else. And that to me is, we're at the beginning of the beginning almost of seeing how that actually impacts the industry. Nika?
Oh, yeah.
See, Iris also has her hand up as well.
Let Iris go first. I've talked too much.
It's a problem. I just want to add a little bit of what Austin was saying as well. It's absolutely, I mean, nothing to add on top of that. But the other good thing about OpenTelemetry is that you don't have to break your whole system to implement it as well. That is one of the great things, because it's compatible with almost all technologies that we currently have, especially the open source ones. So you don't have to cause downtime, have your developers blind for hours and days. You can just put it there flawlessly. So that's the best of all for me.
Yeah, I think there's really two fundamental shifts, right? There's one is we started adopting architectures that became much harder to diagnose with the stuff that you taught yourself when you taught yourself to code, right? Like, hey, adding in some logging lines and such is not going to work on a large microservice architecture. The other change, and it's been a while, but it's still there, is that when you have conversations about funding, when you have conversation with VC, they're going to ask you about your observability setup, right? So those two changes combined have really changed where the conversation is with observability, where it went from an internal discussion about maybe developer velocity and rollback times and these other pieces to like, yeah, we have to have this and it has to be applicable across this larger stack.
I think there is some fair bit of standardization that gets promoted on the consumer side of things as well. Given that there is a standard in how you instrument, take metrics, for example, gauges, counters, exponential histograms, whatever. Like earlier, it used to be that if you picked one time series database, you would get certain capabilities defined in a certain way. If you have to switch, then the likelihood of that capability existing may not be always possible. But now, since there is a standardization in the ingest, eventually there will be a good amount of standardization on what technology that the providers, either open source projects or vendors, provide. So I think the net benefits are definitely there across the board, not just on the instrumentation side.
So I think that's actually, you bring up a really interesting point, right? Like historically, everything about telemetry has really been a pretty binding abstraction to the data store. So if you were using, statsd metrics worked in the way they did because of the way that statsd, store and let you query that. Prometheus metrics work the way they do because of how you store and query them. Logging databases tend to, if you're using Elasticsearch or something, like the format mattered. and that influenced how the client libraries were designed, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. With OpenTelemetry, we kind of break that, right? Like you have to, OpenTelemetry tells you like, hey, this is what a histogram looks like. This is what a structured event of any kind looks like. And I think it's interesting that you also see this rise in popularity of column stores for storing observability data, like metrics, logs, traces, session, whatever. You throw a rock and you'll hit a new, column store based, or heck, new ClickHouse based telemetry thing. Like, and it's great. And I think OpenTelemetry has actually been a huge factor in this, because it used to be, if you wanted to go and build like an observability tool or build some sort of analysis tool, you would have to like come up with all this stuff, or no one would use it. You'd have to come up with your API, you'd have to come up with your SDK, you'd have to build integrations for 40 billion things. And OpenTelemetry means like, actually, that's all commodity now. You just get that for free with OTel, and you can build really interesting workflows on top of that data. And I think that's very friendly for developers, right? Like going forward, we haven't even really started to see like, how do these tools become integral in, development workflows, right? When do we get to, IDE level integration and all that? So I know it's very easy to feel like OpenTelemetry is done, or like that it's kind of like hitting this plateau, but I think we're really, really still in early days with what people can actually do with it.
I have to agree on this being early days for OTel. So a little bit about my background is I was in observability before I hopped over to cloud for a bunch of years, and now I'm back in the observability space. And the conversations that I'm having with people today they remind me a lot about conversations about Git like 15 years ago or something like that, when it was sort of a perennial joke that everyone's like, oh yeah, Git looks really interesting, we're thinking about moving to Git. I mean, we're still on insert, insert system here, but it feels almost every conversation I have, and again, we're in the pipeline space, so it's about routing and moving and transforming all the data to the right spot, but everything that comes out of us is OTel. So if they just need to bolt on something and they want to do that, they can do that. But the first thing they talk to us about is something with some sort of data not being in the right place. And the second thing is, also we're starting to look at OTel. Is that good? And being the second question, I think, is a good sign of like climbing the curve. But I think there's still plenty of room to grow.
And I guess speaking of that, how did you first hear about the project? I think it's kind of clear, like some of the things that have drawn you all to it. Something I think too that people might be interested in is, how did you get leadership buy-in?
I can say something about this because for me it's easy. So how I heard about the project, I have when I started working with observability, I became obsessed with tracing. I'm still fascinated by tracing, so I was like, oh, tracing so amazing, and I started just searching online about that, and I came across OpenTelemetry. I started playing with it for a long time and not actually implementing anything. So when I joined Farfetch, we were like, okay, we need something new, something better. Okay, what about OpenTelemetry? And it was very surprising because there was an immediate support. I like to say and brag that we have a very good observability culture, but maybe everyone had heard about it. We just made a small presentation, and our leadership was on board. Of course, it has a lot of benefits, and we had to present what we're lacking, the issues that we're currently facing, and what telemetry can help us with. And it was immediate support. So every time I tell this story, some people don't believe me, but that's exactly how it happened. It was very interesting, very, very fast support in my case.
I can maybe go next. At least in our case, I think I first came to know about it as part of the OpenTelemetry will will basically be the standard, and we would eventually retire open tracing and open census. I think that we were passively trying out open tracing around that time, and this announcement came, and it was like, hey, interesting, this is something that we need to watch out for. And we were doing passive experiments with the OpenTelemetry SDK and the collector for a few months. And once the model hit stability, that's when we made the informed call that, okay, we'll start tracing with the OpenTelemetry as an offering inside the company. So now we had the OpenTelemetry SDK for traces and Open telemetry collector for the accepting of all the spans. But on the other hand, we had metric beat and file beat for collecting logs, events, and metrics. So at that point, we were at a crossroads of if we should support multiple agents or just standardize across OpenTelemetry collector for everything. And I wrote a very big memo internally on what it would take to migrate out of beats for metrics, logs, and events. Presented it to leadership, and I think we felt that being on a vendor-neutral industry standard would be the better thing for us in the long run, and it's best to do it now than later on. So that's how we did the migration. And on our end, the metric migration was a massive one because we at that time, if I'm not wrong, we were already at 32 million samples per second ingest across more than 100 Kubernetes clusters. A million plus Prometheus endpoints and whatnot. So it was a very, very involved migration that we did, but the benefits are definitely there now.
Vijay, were there any other when you're coming from a culture that has a strong kind of build vibe? What I'm trying to get at is, do you guys run your own collector distro, or are you taking something like how are you managing that in terms of the particular flavor that you decided to land on?
We do run our own distro internally, but I think the number of custom processors that we run are very less. It's mostly that we don't need all the exporters for all the various vendors that are there being packaged in. So we create only the ones that we absolutely need. But for now, like, we export using either OTLP or Prometheus Remote Write protocol, which are pretty much open standards right now.
So it's about being lean.
Right.
Actually, are you all using the collector builder to make your images?
Right now, no. We just craft our own go.mod and then just do it ourselves.
Y'all thinking about using the collector builder?
I think we can. Like, we haven't really explored it, but yeah, we should.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get more people aware of the collector builder because I think it's really cool.
Austin,
What is it?
Could you say what the collector builder is?
So the collector builder, or OCB, is a tool that we provide from the collector repo. And what you can do is you can give it a manifest of Go modules, and it will create a custom image or a custom build of the OpenTelemetry collector for you. So you, like eBay, can, get something that has just the receivers, processors, exporters, connectors, and extensions that you want. It's also a really great way to extend the collector, because this way, instead of having to fork contrib or fork whichever raw base you want and then bringing in the code, you can simply have a Go module published in wherever, GitHub, and pull that in through the collector builder, and bring in your custom extensions and things that way. So it's a really great tool. It's also very friendly for security teams because it gives them a manifest that they can kind of look at and say, like, hey, this is exactly what's in there. And that way, I know if you're at a larger org, security review can be extremely taxing. And if you're trying to use the contrib image, there's an awful lot of dependencies. So something to kind of cut that down to size is very friendly to your friends in security.
Wow. there's a new user now for the builder. I actually had missed this, so now
EIL,
it's great.
yeah.
So, right
There's
after
actually
this
there is
conversation.
so check out the website. OpenTelemetry.io does have has a little tutorial on building with the collector. I actually recently used it for a personal project where I was making some custom processors to talk to an API and do some stuff, some data. So that was really fun to use, and it makes it really easy to, you know, it makes it a lot easier, I think, to kind of use the collector and maybe the way it's sort of intended. I don't necessarily know if our intention was for people to just be pulling this giant contrib image constantly. As long as we're go on.
I was just going to point out that Vijay and Seth very helpfully shared a couple links about the custom collector builder
Perfect.
chat. So
the other
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go on first. You were talking.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to mention we found it very useful. We have forked just a exporter and are working on trying to get a pull request approved for it. But in the meantime, we continue to need to persist those features in newer versions of the collector. So this helps us to kind of drag our single exporter along the way and keep rebuilding it with the new releases. So it's been really helpful.
Yeah, that's another really great use case is if you have custom stuff or if you have just modifications. I know that PRs can sit for a bit sometimes. So yeah. But the other cool use case, the other, and also one of my current hobby horses is if you are using, large language models to assist you in development, so things like Copilot or ChatGPT, then, it's not perfect because of the data cutoffs on that, but over time, like especially as things like PData and other structures in the collector repo stabilize, then it's actually pretty easy to ask ChatGPT like, hey, scaffold me a collector extension. It'll use the wrong APIs, but it'll do 80% of the work for you, and then you can ask it like, hey, I need to transform this data or do whatever. And it's actually a pretty good use case for AI assistance, I think, in programming. So
yeah, especially
play around with that.
Once you get to the point of like just wanting the regex to like transform it in a certain way, it's a good moment for the Copilot.
Yeah. I don't know if it understands OTTL, OpenTelemetry Transform language yet. Probably not. But the models will get better, and I think the biggest thing is just once we get to the point where things are changing a little less frequently, and it can get into the model. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll have something to say about that as a project in the future.
Ooh. Okay, so moving the conversation along, since we've coming up on time almost. What was most surprising as your OpenTelemetry journey got underway? So like, what were the trickiest stakeholders in your case? I think, David, you like to say in observability, there's no technical problems, only people problems.
Yeah. I should stop saying that, even though I'm probably going to keep saying that. But there's, particularly in this space, the technical problems mostly are straightforward. It's all the people problems. So to the whole panel, what were some of the surprising things that you found, either that were sticky and a little bit tricky and had to navigate, or that were surprisingly smooth? Both of those are valid surprises, because we've gone over some of the key selling points here that I think a lot of people would recognize as being useful with going in an OTel direction. But what's the part we didn't say that was either good or that was almost good?
Yeah, I'm currently running a poll on LinkedIn where I ask people if they think OpenTelemetry is easy to use. I won't disclose the results of that poll quite yet. I think there's I'd be interested to hear from people that have gone through implementation journeys.
I can say we're in a pilot for integration with applications, and the .NET library is not quite having the log exporter stable until just very recently. Has been a large deterrent for a very long time. So about 2 years ago, I started trying to convince the application teams to all integrate with OpenTelemetry, and there's been kind of an appetite for some of the more cutting edge teams in our company to try out something that still doesn't have a stable label. But that was a big deterrent. But now that with the, I think it's the 1.6.0 release now, that's stable on the .NET instrumentation library, there's a better story there. And there's more acceptance now. Outside of that, the collector itself, just getting lots of new features for free has been amazing. So as part of the reason we know about the builder, just because we have these custom features that we really want, and we keep seeing better, newer versions of the collector come out. It's like, oh, wow, we better upgrade because we don't want to sit on this old stuff when all these other great people have been contributing a lot of good enhancements. So that's been an easy sell to say, here's why, part of the why of helping teams move to this instrumentation challenge that will take some time for them to work through.
Mm-hmm. Actually, can we play a fun game? Can I get everyone to open up your Zoom chat and tell me what language do you use OTel in? And do you think it's good? Do you think the SDK is good in that language? This data may be used by the project.
See, what you don't know is that the part of this request that's hard for me is that the Zoom client on my machine is very temperamental in terms of opening the chat window. So that's the hard part.
Okay, well, I can see the chat. Node, yes, it's good. I think JS has gotten a lot better. I think most of the problems in JS right now have a lot more to do with like ESM and CJS and various JavaScript things, ecosystem things, rather than any problem with the language or SDK. Go, a lot of changes for metrics. Yeah, Go needs some love, I feel like. Go was written by several dear friends of mine who know Go in, out, left, right, and indifferent, and it's great. And it's actually pretty idiomatic Go, I think, but it's kind of hard to use because it's idiomatic Go. Personal opinion. Exemplars not getting implemented in what? Which language? All of them? Some of them?
Most of them. I think the only one where it's actually implemented is Java, and
Java
then
does it, I know.
experimentally in .NET. And then from what I've asked around, like not really anywhere else. Like I've seen a bunch of open PRs around that, but no actual implementations.
I think we need to get better about closing PRs. Net, Python, Java, pretty good. Yeah, I'd say. Java, Kotlin, multi-platform, non-existent. Have you looked at the to Derek? There's I don't know if it actually is in the repos yet, but I know Splunk donated their Android client SDK thing that I think targets Kotlin. I know they either it has been donated or it is being donated. I'd have to check.
Yeah, I've been watching that donation process.
Okay.
Yeah, for us, we're looking for an SDK that could be used by Kotlin multi-platform to go both on iOS and Android clients. I know some people are using the Java SDK, purely for Android, but we'd have to just implement them separately. Yeah.
That is interesting. Will you be at KubeCon by any chance?
I will.
Look me up when you're there. We'll talk about it.
Cool.
Go terrible. Yeah, Go is right now a little bit of a hobby horse for me. I think it is high on my list of languages that feels like it needs developer experience love. I'm sorry for taking over your panel, Reese. Java good.
I kind of like the inner. It's always, I feel like it's hard to get a big group of people online to participate. So,
downward API for. Yeah, Kate's is also an interesting one. When we went to Kubernetes years ago, and if you're not aware, Kubernetes has started to feature gate and alpha and beta native OTel traces from things like Kubelet and a few other and the API server. So there is more support for OTel coming in. The biggest thing is Kubernetes metrics are all super Prometheused out, and that is probably not going to change anytime soon. But there is some interesting stuff with Prometheus talking about like how, should Prometheus just use like OTel libraries and stuff like that. So we might see some changes there. And hopefully that can lead to a more unified sort of telemetry story for Kubernetes. Azure Functions as a Service.
I'm sure the majority of people are using Lambda, and that seems to be the main focus of the community at this point.
Yeah, I think we really just need people to. I will also plead ignorance. I don't know if they have an equivalent for Lambda layers or extension layers. Do you know?
I've looked across the project, and while at the top of the FAS offering of the OpenTelemetry, if you look at the documentation, it says, for example, Azure Functions, AWS Lambda. There's really not much integration, if any, with Azure itself. So
my experience on the pipeline side with Azure Functions, I believe is the official name, spending a lot on that naming convention, is there's a dual writer that you can enable, but then you essentially have to set up something that collects all of that information. So we recommend like throwing up a small K8s cluster, depending on how much traffic you want to throw at it. But you could be running anything in there. And it's basically a pretty good dual writing mechanism, whereas the Lambda layer stuff tends to have startup and cooldown times that I think actually Azure Functions is probably a more scalable approach, particularly if you get really distributed.
Is it function to App Insights and then App Insights split out into OTel?
It's not. It doesn't bounce off of App Insights. It's from the function itself, I believe.
Yeah, it's a writer SDK that Microsoft provides to write out to wherever. Mm-hmm. Part of the challenge was like, well, is there a way from Azure Monitor to monitor the actual use of it rather than incurring extra cycles within the function itself to emit its own telemetry? But
okay.
I think the only tricky part is if you definitely want to use an alternative source, you have to essentially restrict the IAM permissions of the function to not write to App Insights. And that's the only way to actually cut it off, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, also, I'm just going to step in real quick to bring
discussion
back around.
Sorry. This is a very interesting discussion. Feel free to ping me on the CNCF Slack if you'd like to continue it, but I think it's going to require several moving parts.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Well, thanks.
We could definitely host another conversation around this another time. But to bring it back to this panel, I would like to know, how has the focus of your observability practice changed or not changed after implementing OpenTelemetry? And what are you looking forward to next, either from the project or as a result of your observability efforts? And David is nodding very emphatically, so I'm going to go with David.
No, I was mostly nodding because I definitely want to hear this answer, because there's I alluded to this earlier, but there's sort of this moment where we think if we have everything, that definitely is valuable, but it feels like it's not enough. And then if we feel like we could put it all, I'll use the phrase single pane of glass. If we single pane of glass something, then something will be better, and then it's not. And so then we got to figure out the next thing. So I'm very interested to hear from the rest of the panel.
Vijay, I'll pick on you.
Okay. Starting from the previous question, right? Like when we did the migration, there was one feature that we were shocked that did not exist. And I don't think it still exists, which is dynamic reloading of configurations. That was very crucial for us, especially while scraping Prometheus endpoints in Kubernetes. So that was something that we had to build on our own as a custom receiver. But that is a feature that I would really like to see on the collector. Because if that exists, then we don't have to have a custom receiver that can like watch on the API server, look for annotations, create configurations when the pod comes up, and then tear it down when the pod goes down.
You should definitely pay attention to KubeCon hotel announcements then.
Okay, yeah, I'd be definitely interested in that. That was one, but the other one is agent management at scale. I know we have OpAmp, but we don't have like an off-the-shelf implementation within the OpenTelemetry community that people can spin up and then do agent management. We'd probably have to do it ourselves. For larger companies, it might be still easy to do, but I think for the general public, I think it would be easy to just have something that they can take up and run with it. With tracing, one of the challenges that we had was not enough reference implementations, especially around the collector, saying, okay, where does K8's enrichment sit in the pipeline? Where does red metrics or span metrics connector sit? And what are the parameters that we could potentially tune? Not enough people have talked about it. At least for metrics, we did a case study ourselves to say that these are the challenges that people might run into. But for tracing, it would be really good if there were more case studies on how people are using exemplars, how they're setting up the collectors, anything that people need to be aware of with regards to gRPC. I've heard many folks complain about gRPC pinning the connection to a certain collector and then killing it. But like we haven't seen good blog posts that actually solve it. So I think like, yeah, a lot more case studies would definitely be helpful. For our part, like we are doing 2 talks in KubeCon to share about what we have learned specifically with tracing and metrics around OpenTelemetry. But it would be great if we hear a lot more.
Iris.
Well, from our side, I think there hasn't been a challenge so far that we haven't been able to find a solution. And that goes back to also the poll that Austin was mentioning. If you were to choose how easy is OpenTelemetry easy, I would say in our case has been pretty easy. But the challenges that we're working on and that of course I'd like to see improved in the future, we're mostly using the OpenTelemetry operator. And I have a love-hate relationship with the collector that is being deployed by the collector. There is a lot of things missing there, especially the presets. You test something on the normal collector and then you go to implement it on the out of the box and it's not there. So that's something that has been a challenge. Of course, we can do it with custom configurations. And I would say that the other challenge is logging. We're doing pretty well with metrics and traces. And generally, we get the good information that we need. If we're missing something here or there, we find a workaround Reddit. But logging is not part of, is not being touched by OpenTelemetry at all for us. So that's something that I would like to see it a bit more stable and hopefully have it full unified observability with OpenTelemetry, not just metrics and traces, which of course have been the center of the project right now. So just waiting for more changes on the logging part.
Austin, did you have anything to add to that?
I think that I think everyone will be really excited to hear about the stuff that we will be announcing and talking about at KubeCon this year, coming up in November, live from Chicago. If you are attending in person, there will be a ton of great OpenTelemetry announcements, activities, and various other things. And we're really excited about, not only the progress that the project has made this year, but also what is coming next. So stay tuned.
Oh, activities too.
Yes.
Nika or David, did you have anything to add as far as like the focus of your observability practice, or what are you looking forward to next from OTel or your Ollie efforts?
I think there's two things we're seeing. One, of course, we're seeing enterprises really see that the amount of control they have with running OpenTelemetry sort of compensates for some of the grit that exists in the gearbox as they try to make it meet their needs. And then on the other side, we're seeing new developers realize that like part of being a competent new developer, and I think the Git comparison is very apt, yeah, of course, source control if you're going to write code of any kind for production, right? And so the same thing's happening with observability, where previously maybe, hey, you were just entering a few log lines and then you were ready to go. It's like, no, we need to know how to actually, implement one of these tools from the start and implement tracing from the start. So sort of from two directions, I think OpenTelemetry is getting a lot of momentum in the next year.
Yeah, I am looking forward to the day when you have to have a reason to be off OTel instead of to be on OTel, because and to see how that affects the vendor landscape. So I'm here on behalf of a vendor, but because we're in pipelines, like if I could get rid of all of our integrations that weren't OTel, it would just be so much easier. Instead of having to do something really bespoke for everything that's out there. But there was a great article not that long ago that you wrote, right? Nočnica, isn't that right? About how OTel at the moment is being treated in various tools differently.
Oh, we don't need to talk about that. I've got some great stuff coming out next week that is not quite so mean to my good friends at Datadog and New Relic, but
I think we all need a little bit of a kick in the pants sometimes.
Well,
I think it's allowed.
Yeah, one of the really fundamental things, like when I was working at New Relic on the integration with X-ray data, right, is that it's like, hey, yes, we can shove these things together and we can make it kind of work, but until we all adopt one open standard, this is just too complex a data type to just really fluidly chart in one view and see from one view and do things like what is the average amount of time consumed by this single function, by the single DB call, right? That is going to be very tough to do until you just say, look, we all have to be on these open standards. Some really weird LLM training task, yes, okay, it's going to use some super strange system for that doesn't really look like tracing or time spans at all. Cool. But everything else, right? We need to adopt an open standard to really be able to have OTel data be a first-class citizen.
So I'm looking forward to OTel winning. That's all.
Same. I think it's already won in many ways, right? Like, just not to toot my own horn or to toot the project's horn, but everyone likes to refer to the XKCD like there's 14 competing standards. I'm going to make the unifying one. Now there are 15 competing standards. Like, I think whatever, I'm under no delusion that like this is the apex of innovation in the space. Like there will be, future developments and other things. But I think in terms of, consolidating the last 2-3 decades worth of thinking about application and infrastructure telemetry data and how it can be used together, like I think OpenTelemetry is going to be foundational for a generation of observability practitioners for engineers, right? Like there will be something in the future, but I think in terms of where we are now, this is kind of the thing. And whatever comes next is going to be influenced by things that we don't even see. Like I've been doing a lot of research on AI and large language models and stuff. And if you look at what are you actually doing when you make a request to a large language model? You're making a trace. It's literally a trace. It is a Dapper style trace where you have requests and responses. Even the most advanced thing we can think about in terms of software architectures right now and whatever looks like stuff that we have a way to model in OTel today. So until that changes, I feel like OpenTelemetry is, long term going to be what at least until I am retired. So give it 30 years, but Like it's going to be the thing.
So Justin in the
Um,
chat asks, any
yeah.
thought on Micrometer's approach of blending the signals into a single observation API from which traces, logs, and metrics are all derived?
I think that's fine. Like, I think I do think that like the thing we actually need is we need as a project for people to commit to OTLP as being an output format. And we need people to respect, hey, this is trace data and it should be interpreted differently than metric data or whatever. Even if you are going to like splay those out into a generic sort of event data structure, there are use cases for keeping those things separate in terms of observability pipelining. Yeah, there's maybe not a cut and dry answer to this.
I would like to point out that it is the top of the hour, so if you have to go, obviously feel free to jump.
Okay, see you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you,
Take
everyone.
care, everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye bye.